Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another predictions video, and in today's video I'm going to be predicting the Guevara versus Cuadras fight. If you are new around here though and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Like it if you do indeed like it, and let's get straight into it. So going into this fight, Guevara is 43-1 with 22 KOs and Cuadras is 41-5-1 with 28 KOs. This fight is for the vacant WBC Interim World Super Flyweight title. Guevara's last fight was a win via unanimous decision versus Herrera, and Cuadras' last fight was a win via TKO in round 5 versus Morales. Guevara is 34 and Cuadras is 35. Guevara's losses have come versus Taraji in 2017, Kimura in 2015, Casemiro in 2012. And Casemiro in 2012. He's now on a 10-fight win streak and he's been pro since 2008. Cuadras' losses have come versus Rodriguez in 2022, Estrada in 2020, Arroyo in 2018, Estrada in 2017, and Gonzalez in 2016. He has been pro since 2008 as well. Just to speak a bit more about what I've just said there, so of course they're both coming off victories. They're both relatively good, convincing victories against opponents which maybe aren't the best, but they're still victories nonetheless. Of course, they're both on the older side. People are most definitely questioning if they're deserved of this interim world title shot, and let alone a world title shot in general. With their recent fights, obviously they're winning, but they're against lesser opponents, and I mean especially Cuadras coming off fights where, I mean, he's only recently just had a world title shot against Rodriguez and he was like beaten convincingly in that, and so there's questions if they should be fighting for this world title shot. You'd have to kind of argue that they both are past their peaks, but either way they're still high in the rankings, so to an extent you do have to kind of accept that it is a world title world interim title fight, and it's fair enough that it kind of is. And of course Guevara now on a 10-fight win streak. Like I mentioned, they're not really against any opponents of note. You probably have to say the last notable opponent he fought was Taraji back in 2017, and obviously that was a while ago, and he lost that fight as well, and that was in the lower weight division, and you kind of have to argue he wasn't in his prime in the lower weight division, and so he's not the kind of more natural super featherweight as what you'd have to say Cuadras is. But to be fair, Cuadras in his last two fights, from what I believe, I think his last fight he fought at bantamweight, and his fight before he fought at a catchweight, so neither of them have really been fighting at this weight for that long. Or I mean, Cuadras has been fighting his weight for a long time, but now he's moving away from that and seemingly struggling a bit to make that weight. So, you know, it'd be interesting to see what weigh-in is like and everything like that, and how they are operating at this weight, both fighters. Guevara as a fighter, he's a kind of back foot type fighter. He gives all in fights. He will move well. He keeps range well. He's arguably the fresher fighter out of the two. Picks his shots. He's composed. Got a good stretched out jab. He's quicker. He's hard to pin down. He's got a high guard. He can push you back. I know like I said that he can box on the back foot. He can, but he can also box on the front foot. And when he's fighting opponents that also kind of counter punches, and maybe to an extent are a little bit not wanting to push the pace and put the pressure on, he can really utilize that range and that jab that he has to really control with it and push fighters back with it. And the fact that I would say he's got high defensive IQ in the way of he knows what to do in the way of when he's putting his hands up, he knows when to kind of let out his damage, but then also to know when to put his hands up and keep his hands high when necessary. And so that's good to see. Links to, like I said, the high guard, and it's what a lot of fighters, especially aggressive fighters, don't really have. You kind of have to say that Cuadras isn't really that clued up defensively, and so for a high defensive IQ fighter to be fighting the more attacking fighter in what Cuadras is, it's going to make for an interesting fight, a contrast in styles. The negatives about him, I mean, like I mentioned, he's had better days at lower weight classes. He's got a lesser output. In close, he's not amazing. On the front foot, in my opinion, he doesn't really punish enough. I think when he is on the front foot and he does possibly back you up, he doesn't really let his hands go enough to really kind of put any damage on in that aspect, or at least as of recent. He stands a bit upright. He's got a lack of combinations. He will also lunge in. When I say he's got a good stretched out jab, he does, but he also comes in with his other leading punch as well, and sometimes that can be stretched out and leave his head in. He can also headhunt at times. He's not really willing to trade, which isn't really necessarily a bad thing, but I'm sure that Cuadras is going to be wanting to do that. He's not fought, like I mentioned, high level realistically since 2017, and sometimes you see this with defensive fighters. They can get a bit too comfortable at times, and I'd have to say that Guevara can sometimes get a bit too comfortable. But in a fight against Cuadras, you can't really be affording to get too comfortable. Speak about Cuadras, he's the bigger fighter. In my opinion, he's able to bully opponents. He's durable, he's got snapping combinations, a solid jab, he's aggressive, he's got good body work, he can counter well, he's in close or at range type fighter. In my opinion, he does fight best at in close, but of course he can fight at range. He gives his all. He can't really be counted out in a fight, even if he is losing and the odds are against him. He still can come back or even just deliver good moments. He changes levels well. He'll always respond. He won't really be bullied himself, even in fights where he's getting outboxed and outworked. Like you have to say, maybe the Jesse Bam Rodriguez fight as of recent, he was getting outboxed, outworked, but he still wasn't really being bullied and was still responding in times where he was getting hit with big shots himself. He was still coming back, and that's what won him a couple of rounds and kind of asserted himself for a couple of rounds. He's powerful, of course, in his own aspect, and he will drag opponents into his type of a fight, which he definitely did with the likes of Jesse Bam Rodriguez as well, and he did it even in the arguably first Estrada fight, and that's what can make things difficult for his opponents. And so it's going to be interesting to see how he does impose himself, what it's going to be like in the way of if he can pin down Guevara. Obviously Guevara is also older as well, so he's not going to have an amazingly good gas tank, you'd like to think, and maybe it's not bad, but you'd like to think that possibly you could drag him into a war, and that's not what Guevara is going to want to be. But if he's not really willing to trade, it's going to be interesting to see how things play out and then what Cuadras' game plan is going into this one. Cuadras' negatives, I mean, he's been declining recently. He's obviously coming off a good stoppage victory last time, but I mean, every time he's kind of fought recently a big name, I mean, you'd think Estrada, that second fight was him losing convincingly. Rodriguez, he lost convincingly. There was still obviously good times where he had in the fight, but he did lose convincingly in the end. He struggles to make the weight a bit, like I mentioned. He's slower, he's heavier footed, he lacks lateral movement, he lacks head movement, can come in a bit off balance at times. He's obviously there to be hit. He can be a bit wild at times. He can struggle against the speed and kind of movement of other fighters to try and catch them and pin them down. He often stands upright as well. He crosses feet. He does tire, but he tires in the way of his kind of movement tires, and he slows down even more, but he's still always going to be throwing in the process as well because he has that kind of heart and that mentality to just always be throwing. Guevara is the favourite for this fight, and I think that Cuadras will win via TKO in round 6. I think Guevara, he's got that style which is going to give him longevity in the sport, and it's done that to this point already. But I think Cuadras is just still going to have a little bit left in him, and he's going to give this all in this final fight, in my opinion. This possibly could be his final big level win, in my opinion. And if he loses this one, if either fighter loses this one, then you'd like to assume that this is a less kind of big chance. And I think Cuadras is going to give it his all. I think he's going to really try and push the pace and just try and just stalk Guevara down, and Guevara is going to try and keep a jab on the back foot, you'd like to think, but I don't know if he's going to be able to do that for the full fight. And I think Cuadras, being the naturally bigger guy in the process as well, could make I don't know if this is even an upset, but he could stalk him down and manage to get a stoppage. I don't know if it would be a huge KO stoppage, but I think he just could outwork him and possibly hurt him with them body shots as well, and get the stoppage victory. Then who he could go on to fight? I mean, there's not loads of options realistically. I mean, he'd be interim champion and Estrada's champion, but does anybody really care about seeing Estrada Cuadras free? Not really. Obviously, that's an option. Gonzalez again is another option, but I don't really know if anybody's too fussed about that. Eddie Hearn spoke about Yafai possibly fighting him. That could be an option. Yafai's fighting Santamaro, so you never know. There's a couple of options as well in the division, but I don't really think there's many big fights, and I don't think he's really that deserving or is going to get a world title fight, because I just don't think the champions are really looking at him at the moment. And it is fair enough because, like I mentioned, Estrada especially, he's fought him twice and beat him twice anyway, so I don't know. But either way, I think this fight could be in the making for an interesting fight. But yeah, that's it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like it if you didn't, like it, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.